listening to the 14th Source for all geek and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through inquisitive and critical lenses. In the episode for Friday, January 31st, 2024. Nope, 5. Wow. That's how apparently rarely we do this podcast. I forgot what year it was.
What year it is, yeah. Well, yeah. We did miss last week.
Yeah, mostly because I couldn't talk. School started and I talk a lot. And because my voice is kind of low, I end up having to yell. And I lose my voice during the first week. It's just kind of how it works. I've actually started, because I'm not as young as I used to be, started doing vocal exercises on my drive to work, which I'm like, that just seems it's a smart idea, but it also feels like I've lost. I don't know. Maybe that's just Trump's America.
Woo!
But let's not start on that note. I want to just jump in real quick with a piece of news, Andrew, before we get to our weeks in geek. We debated on maybe focusing on on talking about this news item as part of a show, but there's not a lot to say about it aside from it just kind of happened. But a couple weeks ago, I think it was at the beginning of the year, the premier, at least one time premier comic book distributor Diamond actually filed for bankruptcy.
Right. So Diamond, who's a comic book distributor, but also they own Alliance, which is one of the 4 or 5 major tabletop game distributors.
Just straight up filed for bankruptcy. And on the comic side of things, not that surprising because a lot of I can't remember who I don't think Marvel nor DC nor Image Comics were using Diamond as their main distributor anymore. And those are the top 3 and the majority of the market share. And it's an interesting kind of end to the story where Diamond, and it's fitting end to the story because Diamond had come in and just ravaged the competition where it was for a long time. Every publisher had a different distributor, and it was kind of a competitive market. But Diamond just kind of assassinated all the competition and became a monopoly, for lack of a better word. And with the onset of COVID and rising prices and whatnot, people started looking elsewhere, or publishers started looking elsewhere, and found elsewhere, and thus made it a more competitive and engaging market. And Diamond wasn't prepared for this. The sad part is that they kind of, as you insinuated with Alliance, their sort of fall brought down a lot of other things in its wake. And that is sad. I'm not going to say obviously people are losing their jobs and that's not good, but man, on the comic book side of things, it's a long time coming.
It couldn't happen to a worse company.
Right. I know. So, again, there's not a lot of commentary here because I think both you and I would agree. It's is it better to have a market in monopoly? No, not really. So fuck them. But if anything, it's an end of an era, but it was a slow death. And it's interesting to see kind of how everything that was under their umbrella, that remained under their umbrella, kind of settles out. Have you heard anything sort of since the announcement of the bankruptcy that has about the Alliance properties and stuff like that? Or
I have not. I mean, the problem is that Alliance was not as dominant in the industry is there were quite a few other distributors, GTS, ACD,
so a healthy market is what I'm hearing.
The problem is they all engage in the kind of tomfoolery that I was just the fact that they would get exclusive distribution deals. So it'd be this thing where it's if you're a game shop, you kind of have to go to all of them because if you want all the games, so it's like you want to sell people playing video games on a console, but because there's Xbox and Nintendo and whatever, you have to have all 3 of them because they're just because of that exclusivity, kind of like that. I don't know. So but also tabletop gaming in such a weird space, right?
Explain.
Just in terms of I do think there's issues with What is it that, like, with role-playing games, people are playing a lot more online. Even like Wizards of the Coast is basically trying to get into like direct, subscribe to the online thing,
like subscription-based stuff.
Well, but like online, like don't buy the rule book. I mean, you can buy the rule book, but subscribe to D&D Beyond,
right,
and get the content of the rule book. And then a lot of these indie games that are all just like on their own in most cases, right? They're like doing the best they can, but they don't really have the kind of reach. And then for tabletop gaming, with Asmodee, the Embracer, which owned. That they owned Asmodee, right? This was we talked about this, I think, 6 months ago. So basically the company that Embracer, the company that owned like all of video games, also owned most of tabletop gaming.
Right. Oh, the Embracer problem. Yes, of course.
Yeah, and so when they filed for bankruptcy, their whole thing was they broke into three. They're basically breaking into three companies.
Right.
One of them is Asmodee, which is like 90% of fucking tabletop gaming.
Right. They had a bunch of, like, wasn't there like the Middle Earth company or some bullshit like that? Yeah.
Yeah. It's so like, it's a weird industry right now because it's kind of dominated by a few people, but then there's a lot of just people like doing shit on itch.io.
Drive-through, right?
Drive-through RPG, like just,
Well, fuck, Drive-through RPG, Drive-through comics. Like there's a whole, like Drive-through has a really interesting corner on the market, very small but focused. And for those that use it, very devoted.
Yeah. So I don't know. To me, I don't know what the industry is, and even with Magic, right? Like if you think about that, that's always like a tent pole of the industry. But then, like, dude, they've been doing a lot of direct sales, right? Like Secret Lairs and all this shit. Where like, hey, they want to sell you the cards direct now, more and more. Not necessarily, and yeah, I just don't really know what the like what Diamond Going to Hell is. I don't even know if that's going to matter in tabletop gaming.
Well, it's going to be filled with recognizable company. That's what it sounds like. But I guess the big takeaway here is that I bet you're really glad you don't work in a game store anymore.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Although that's other, how many game stores are there? Actually, I will say the one game store that's like in my actual neighborhood of Seattle. There are a lot of game stores in Seattle, but like the one that's near me, Phoenix Comics and Games. They are a comic shop.
You live in Arizona?
No. But they I stress it, like, how is he bouncing between these different, like market changes, right? Like you're selling comics, you're selling indie stuff, you're selling whatever.
Oh, I think I actually went to Phoenix Comics. You've been there, yeah. That's a nice little store. At least it was a little store when I was there 1,600 years ago. Yeah.
Bigger now. They expanded into the neighbor spot. But
rose from the ashes, if you will.
Yeah. So it is just this weird thing of who knows. So who knows? And couldn't have happened to a worse company.
No, I wish them all the worst. But we're not here to wish the worst on each other, because Andrew and I have convened to bring you another episode, which, since it's been a minute, we're going to discuss our respective weeks in Geek. So Andrew, as is tradition, what was your week in Geek like this week?
Yeah, so I watched Star Trek.
Okay. So my week in Geek is...
No, there was a new Star Trek.
No, hold on. Lower Decks is done.
Yeah.
Strange New Worlds hasn't started yet.
Yeah.
So what the fuck else is there? Discovery's done.
Yeah.
Are there new shorts?
No.
Star Trek shorts?
This is a movie. It's a movie.
No.
Star Trek movie.
I look at my movie listings. There's nothing.
Star Trek Section 31. The movie. It's Section 31. That's what it's called.
Section 31. Oh.
Yeah, so this is the new movie.
And scene. So.
This is the new movie that came out. It was basically, it's a spin-off of Discovery.
Right.
So after Discovery season 1, I think, Michelle Yeoh portrayed a character. She actually technically two characters, but the one of the characters she portrayed, who I will just describe as Philippa Giorgio. Okay. Sorry, I'm like dancing around spoilers for Discovery season 1, but honestly, I'm gonna pop that pretty quick because I can't.
It's Discovery
really
season 1.
This.
5 seasons are done. 5 seasons?
Yeah, 5 seasons.
So
that's
just
from like
deal with
7
it.
years ago.
That's the.
So it's not me dealing with it, Dan. It's you.
I'll get to Star Trek Discovery in 2034.
Years. You'll forget.
So, yeah, it's fine.
You'll be watching it when the econ is raiding your little village in Montana. You'll be watching it on your video disc player.
I'll go out back and charge up the generator with my hand crank so we can watch the next episode of Star Trek Discovery that has been distributed on
magnetic
on beta because that's the media that survived. So yes.
No, so it features it's the continuing story of Philippa Georgiou, who we last saw in Star Trek Discovery Season 3. And basically it takes place in the early 24th century. So this is after the original series movies had completed, but decades before the Next Generation, right? Next Generation is like 2360 some. This is 2320-ish. So it's a story where basically
it's kind of like Andor between the prequels,
sure,
and the original.
Put it however you want. So basically, the story follows this Alpha team, which is a detachment of Section 31, which is the kind of super secret squirrel agency that basically does kind of dirty stuff for the Federation, but officially doesn't exist. And it's something that was revealed in a show that Dan is watching, and it's kind of been featured in Star Treks ever since, on and off.
The Goldbergs?
The Goldbergs.
It's in the Goldbergs?
No,
that's interesting.
Yeah, it was originally introduced in Deep Space Nine, and conceptually. Yeah, and so it's been kind of this on and off thing, but it was featured in Star Trek Discovery a little bit in Season 1, but more in Season 2. So basically the idea that this super secret agency, which essentially recruits whoever to accomplish these tasks that are for the good of the Federation,
right?
But are outside of Federation law. And they basically go to the space station to recruit Philippa Georgiou, who's been gone for decades. Because she was in Star Trek Discovery Season 3, which was in the 32nd century. She ends up gets time traveled back, and they find her and like, hey, we're here to to get you on board with what we're doing.
Right. That sounds real complicated. Yeah.
That's
Discovery for you, right?
it is the premise is very much it's a team. I mean, look, honestly, having watched it, I understand what the show was going to be. It's Mission Impossible. It's Star Wars Mission Impossible. They have a team of people that are like good at what they do, that are kind of like all like they can be disavowed. They don't have official agency. They're just the people doing the job, and they're going to go do jobs that are too hard or too.
But since it's a sanctioned team, you can't call it Star Trek Leverage.
Right. It's very much Mission Impossible. And I can imagine if the show actually had been made, they literally would even do the opening where they like, here's who we're recruiting this episode,
I like it.
But yeah. So, but except now what happened was after Season 1,
this data pad will self-destruct.
Right? Like, I mean, you could do that, right? After the first season of Discovery, or maybe the second, they announced they're going to do the show because Michelle Yeoh, she really liked the character. She liked the part. And this was pre-pandemic.
The key detail here is that it was going to be introduced as a show, or at the very least a limited series kind of thing, right?
A limited series / show.
Right.
But they kind of delayed it in part because they didn't want to have too many shows going at once. And then, of course, the pandemic happened. Like, they were actually slated to start filming, I think, in early 2020. Now, also, you have to remember that Michelle Yeoh kind of had a career trajectory.
Something happened.
The meantime. Yeah, she was.
It's like she was everything everywhere all at once.
All at once. And that definitely affected her availability. Although I'm understanding she still wanted to do it.
Yeah.
So over time we have all these shows now, like things are going really well. Hey, let's dial it back. I mean, she appeared in Discovery through Season 3. But eventually it gets to the point where, hey, what if we just did a movie instead, right?
Right.
And I'm pretty confident, I will say almost certainly they took the first 2 episodes that they'd written and smashed it into a movie. So basically this movie feels like the 2-hour series premiere for a show.
Okay.
Except it's a movie.
Right. Which they did a lot, like especially back in like the 80s and 90s. It was like we released the 2-episode premiere as a movie, but like there's clear like cuts for commercial breaks or like quick fades to black.
This one has a very clear like where episode 1 ends and episode like we're
like, in the middle of the episode they had a previously on.
Yeah, we're in the middle of the movie. There's like it's just like, oh, this is clearly where you would have ended the first episode. Right, in fact, I even think they describe it. They have the narrator voiced by Jamie Lee Curtis actually.
Of course.
Actually say basically like, oh, this is like it's not episode 2. I forget what they call it. Like, you know, something
like
2.
Act 2, Book 2, something like that, right? Yeah.
And then eventually they have a part 3 they also like segue into. It's clear like maybe they cut some of this stuff. Anyway, so you've got this story. It's about this team and how they go off to try to solve a problem. Now, anyone that's been on the internet that watches Star Trek has heard probably that the movie is generally considered bad.
Oh no.
Yeah, it is on the Rotten Tomatoes. It is rotten. It's got what, a 20% rating and a 20% fan rating.
Oh, that's even worse. Yeah,
it is not being well regarded, and I will be honest with you, it's not great. It's not great. I had fun with it. It's not great.
Okay. What happened?
But again, I think for me, I really like the premise. Right, like at the end of it, I'm like, oh shit, I think I would have liked this show.
So, is there? Obviously, Michelle Yeoh's trajectory changed, but like with everything, like there might be a slowdown. Could this still be considered like it's not even a backdoor pilot. Like it's, and I think, was it the original Battlestar Galactica? Didn't they release a movie that was basically the pilot and then went to series? Could you see maybe something like that happen?
Well, so like, the new Battlestar, the sci-fi one, it was actually, they did like a miniseries.
Right. I was talking about the original. I think they released the original, like,
I don't know, man.
The original Battlestar was released to theaters and shit. And
could have been. I honestly, I didn't really.
Sorry, I didn't mean to out-nerd you there. I apologize. I mean,
given that it came out when neither of us was born.
That's how good I am.
Yeah.
But the question still stands, like, could it still read as maybe like a ostensible pilot? But with those ratings, who knows, right?
Right. No, like it literally ends with, hey, now we have the team together, let's do more missions. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah.
It was a test flare that was it was not well received. Which again, I'm sad about because I love the premise.
So why is it bad?
It's not good. It's part of it is okay. So there's a lot of things. I think they make there's some suspect characters. Like they kind of do this zany. Like it's like, because it's not Starfleet, it's not whatever. Some of the characters are weird. One of them is like almost obnoxious. I forget the character's name. Fuzz. To the point where, like, I mean, let's be honest, he dies at the end of the movie.
Okay. So we're not sad about that.
And I was like, good, because I didn't fucking like him anyway. I mean, the actor appears at the end as another character that looks the same. Which there's a story for that. I guess it makes sense. But like, it was just this idea that they kind of had some like, maybe they wanted to make it seem like it was this motley crew, but it was really like, wow, some of these characters are a bit of a mess. They kill some characters very quickly. Like there's one character who I was like, oh, she seems interesting. Like, oh, nope, she's dead. Like, oh,
no longer interesting because she's no longer alive.
Yeah, she is. That operative did not survive.
So I think it's interesting because, and there's kind of two angles I want to take here, but let's take this probably more interesting one first. Contextually and holistically, like Star Trek, Paramount Plus Star Trek, let's be honest, kind of has been on a roll. For all intents and purposes, ding, Discovery ended pretty strong. Obviously, for reasons unknown, Lower Decks ended at its strongest point ever. And of course, Strange New Worlds is still going, is highly anticipated. Its third season is highly anticipated. Like, they seem to kind of be firing on all cylinders. So, like, the Section 31 seemed to have everything in its favor. Like, what do you think, not to speculate too much, but like, what do you think happened? Like, where did it drop? What ball was dropped to make it bad?
I think it's a bit of a mess. I think they tried to do something very different, and maybe they didn't really put enough thought into it. I don't know. I mean, part of it. So here's a problem. That is, here's where we're going to get into spoiler territory for Discovery Season 1.
It's okay. You've been warned, to listeners.
And for Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 6.
Okay, I'll take out my headphones.
So we're talking about an organization that is essentially war crime agency, right? Like Section 31. I was actually joking with a friend making a list. Like, well, no, actually they did a war crime then. Oh, and then they do a war crime then. And while they're doing that war crime, they're doing another war crime in secret that comes back later. I mean, I would say that they are actually, in every appearance, Section 31 is the antagonist in Star Trek.
Let me say, I mean, if one thing Picard has always said is that you can't ever have enough war crimes.
Right. Cisco is the one who actually... I was joking with someone on the internet, like, Cisco's whole thing is like, he's upset with Section 31 because they didn't try to recruit him. Because that man does a few war crimes, you know? He's like, I'm on board with this, just, you didn't invite me. So they're already like, it's kind of a sus principle, which I think was my concern when they announced it. Like, why don't I want to watch a show about war crimes? Now... I now see that, like, oh, but there was this interesting idea of this Mission Impossible thing. But then the other problem is the main character is basically Space Mussolini, right?
Okay, that sounds good.
So it's Space Mussolini leading Team War Crime. And you're like, in Star Trek. And you're like, oh, that's, right? Like,
yeah.
That's I think, and you know, for those who don't know, Philippa Giorgio has played the character that is in Section 31, played by Michelle Yeoh, is Space Mussolini, right? She's literally
overweight, tall, bald.
Big spoiler here. Put your earmuffs on if you don't want to hear it. She's the Empress of the Terran Empire.
Uh-oh.
Right, who basically gets like kind of kidnapped from the mirror universe and now just has to like live out her life masquerading as the Starfleet officer that Michelle Yeoh played in 2 episodes of Discovery.
It's funny, and there's no promo material that showed her with a goatee.
Right. Well, she didn't have a goatee. She had a beautiful golden headdress and swords and killed
Does she have
people.
the little knife?
I believe she has a big knife, if I recall. I forget. It's been Discovery. I don't... In Section 31... So, in the show, Section 31, she's now been away from the Mirror Universe and no longer Empress for a long time, right? She's just living her best life. But it's that weird thing where, and the idea that the character kind of went through like some growth, like, yeah, I was the fucking evil dictator of the mirror universe, but you know, I've had some experiences, you know. And actually, that's kind of her conclusion at the end of Discovery Season 3 is that she has changed at least to some extent.
I should be a better person.
She's not nearly as cruel and ruthless as she was.
Right.
Yeah. So that's a weird thing, and like one of the things I think. The movie really focuses on this story from Season 3 of Discovery where she has some guilt about something that they don't really discuss. And it's revealed here what it is. But it's this idea that like the story focuses on her and her history and her background. And it is like, well, if you don't know who this character is, it's a lot to take in the first 10 minutes of this movie. Like, hey, by the way, this lady that lives on a space station is Space Hitler. And feels a little bit bad about it. Oh, by the way, shit from her past is coming to ruin everything. You know, you're like,
right.
And I think that's actually, I as much as I know she is central to the story, I do think it was a mistake to make her center to the story.
Interesting.
Like the idea that the problem is her problem.
Right.
It is, in fact, like, I mean, again, speaking of war crimes, one of the principles of the concepts in the movie, spoiler, is that someone has a genocide or like a weapon of mass destruction from the mirror universe, which, well, she developed. Like she commissioned this super bomb, and now she's like, oh, the super bomb's out. I need to stop that. And it's like, well, yeah, like, wow, so I guess you do fit in with Section 31. You're like, yeah, war crime, sign me up. And so you can kind of get why, like, in the grand scheme of Star Trek stuff like this is like a weird place to be.
I guess the question that kind of is implied there, and that I've been thinking about, is like, is this a story you want to see in a Star Trek continuity? Part of the premise of Star Trek, and of course, series, I'm not naive here, especially with as much Star Trek as I've seen, which is not nearly, everything. But even as much as I've seen, the original premise is that, especially the Federation is ostensibly built out of a utopian society, right? A post-scarcity, situation. And Deep Space Nine, by its premise, kind of pokes at that a little bit, right? But like that is kind of the basis. And like, do we want to see like a Black Ops Star Trek unit doing its thing? That seems to undercut the entire premise of the franchise in a way. Not saying that it doesn't have opportunity, but it just seems kind of like a weird choice.
Right. And I think in Deep Space Nine, they utilized Section 31 like 3 or 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Again, usually as an antagonist.
Sure, it makes sense.
But the idea that like there's actually one episode where Section 31 essentially is running some big scheme, and they get characters that involved.
Okay.
And to a certain extent, it becomes this idea that like these good people get involved because they understand that the ends are important. Like it's one of those ends justify the means, except, well, no, but we're not going to do it your way. Bad Section 31, except of course they end up doing it Section 31's way, and then they all feel bad about it at the end of the day. However, they're like, oh, but at least we stopped the bad thing, and so like there's a place where you could do that, and that could be interesting. However, the show didn't really get off on that foot. I think this movie, and part of it's because like your main character, like it's interesting if you have characters where like
he's a fascist.
They have some good to them, so like this is a struggle for them to be willing to do that. Right. Here's like, no, she's like, yeah, man, I literally had entire civilizations burned. Yeah, I got a little bit better. Not much, I
guess it's kind of like Marvel's going like, you know what? Who should be the star of our new movie? Thanos. Doesn't that sound like fun?
Right, like Thanos working for working for Hydra to occasionally help out the good guys or something. You're like, okay, that is a weird.
And let's see him grow as a character. Like, how about fuck you?
Oh, he's gonna have a day.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting idea, and it seemed more built out of opportunity than maybe thought in some ways. But what it also sounds like is maybe it's a premise better left to a serialized TV.
Right. Well, and I think part of it was that Michelle Yeoh actually really wanted to do it, is the impression I get. I mean, I believe she's listed as an executive producer.
Oh, damn.
But and I would say the fact that Jamie Lee Curtis is in it really felt like she's like, hey, my friend from this other movie, can she be in it too?
Right. She's like, I got her in my contacts. I could call her if you want.
And it would have felt like, yeah, they're doing their thing together,
Sisters are doing it for themselves, Andrew. That's what I'm hearing.
So I do think this was to a certain extent. She wanted to do this, and they're like, yeah, we'll do it. And she liked this character because this character is like she's playing the bad guy, but the bad guy who does good things.
Right.
It's a weird place to be, but I would say like I like the idea. I had fun with it. It's not. I mean, it's not. Look, it's not Star Trek Into Darkness. That Into Darkness was the movie I walked out of and felt like, wow, someone committed a war crime. This movie was more like, it just wasn't great, like it wasn't a great movie. But I wasn't so horrified I had to spend an hour debating with friends about how the movie was the worst thing that Star Trek's ever done.
You weren't mad at it. It was a movie that just kind of happened.
It happened,
Yeah.
I love that there's, rank the Star Trek movies and Section 31 is not last. In fact, I think there's like 2 or 3 movies that might be more last. I think Star Trek Nemesis is sitting up there. Maybe, potentially more cringe than Section 31. A lot of people say Star Trek 5. So, hey, it's not the worst thing they've ever done.
At least Beyond had motorcycles. That's cool.
Right.
They did jumps. Yeah. Cool jumps.
Yep. So that's Star Trek Section 31. Space Mussolini works with Hydra to save the universe, I guess.
It's nice to see that you're watching in this time of tumult and turnover and possible threat. You are turning to fiction that just is all feel good.
It's all feel good. But honestly, I would love to see just more of like, hey, this random team gets assembled. I always joke, the original Mission Impossible. So Martin Landau technically was not a regular,
Right.
but like at least for the first season or two, he's in like every 2 out of 3 episodes. And I can imagine this Section 31 show where like technically Michelle Yeoh is not the regular, but she appears in like half of them. Right. They have to go recruit like the team and like, well, we got to go get, Philippa Georgiou again because she knows how to blow up things and stab people and kill shit or whatever,
So what I'm hearing is they could have taken that money that's spent on Section 31 and made another season of Lower Decks.
Well, they could have done that too.
They could have done a lot of things, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, but who knows? But anyway,
knows?
that was my little week in geek, Dan. What about you?
I watched TV, and as the listeners know, Andrew and I on the cutting edge of new and exciting television.
This is where you're going to say you started watching Columbo or something.
Right? So, yeah. So he seems like he doesn't know what he's doing. But then he comes around and goes like, aha. No, well, similarly, I'm watching the Apple TV show Severance. Not the newly premiered season 2, because I hadn't seen it yet. So we started Severance season 1. We're not too far into it, so I don't have a whole lot to talk about. It's kind of just a quick dip here in a Week in Geek at the end of the show. But I want to talk a little bit about my road to Severance. Have you seen Severance?
Yeah, I've actually I'm up to date with season 2.
Look at you, my friend.
Yeah.
Wow. You don't go around bragging about it.
I don't.
So like,
well, Severance is kind of a fucking downer of a show.
Yeah, a little bit. So I'm glad that it took 2 years or whatever to make the next season. But I stayed away from Severance mostly because I'm a little dumb. I conflated Severance with another show that a lot of people were talking about that is just a show that is not my thing. And it's a show called Succession, which is just basically about, it's like King Lear, but in corporate America, from what I understand. It's like rich people being mean to each other. And because the names are kind of close, anytime I heard people talking about Severance, I thought they were talking about this show Succession. And I'm like, well, this show's not for
that is a weird mashup.
The mind does crazy things. I heard some voices I follow on the internet, specifically a game developer and video game critic, Austin Walker, talking about Severance. I'm like, well, he's a guy who has really, by my estimation, has really good taste in things. And he is probably not talking about a show about rich people and rich kids fighting about, who gets to take over. Yeah. And so I'm like, what the fuck is Severance? I'm like, oh, this is something completely different.
Completely different.
That sounded intriguing, but I also could tell it was a downer. And so we took a while to get started on it. And so we figured, why not after inauguration?
What timing?
So I needed to lift me up.
I mean, I assume it's also you were so inspired by their advertisements on, wait for it, LinkedIn.
Yep, because I'm on there all the time.
I will say
that's pretty great. That's a great fucking
their LinkedIn. They have, first of all, Lumen has its own LinkedIn page.
Shut the fuck up.
And apparently they have for since season 1, but now people are noticing it. But they're running ads that are not ads for a TV show. They're ads for Lumen.
That's pretty great.
Just like totally like straight faced. Like here's someone talking about the advantages of hiring severed employees. And honestly, it's such like this pastiche of fucking LinkedIn.
Right.
That I'm like, wow, this is like this. The reason to have LinkedIn is to see Apple fucking poke fun at how bullshit LinkedIn is.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, Severance is actually more of a science fiction show.
Yeah.
Basically, the premise is this company, Lumen, develops technology that allows you to sever basically your work life from your home life. They put something in your brain so that as soon as you come to work, everything about your life outside work disappears.
Right.
And then when you clock out, everything from your work life disappears and you go back to your home life. And so you're basically living 2 different existences. And shock among shocks, that doesn't really solve a lot of problems. Well, for the people involved, it's seemingly solving a lot of problems for the corporations involved. But again, we're only 3 episodes deep because we need some time between episodes. But also it's taking us a long time to watch episodes because we're always kind of like a good movie or show often does for my household. We stop and we're talking about it all the time. We're absolutely fascinated by it, despite its absolute dystopian premise. So I'm actually interested to hear, if you can remember, like your initial like introduction and response to the show when you first watched it.
So I want to say that it was already out when I watched it, because I don't think I waited week to week.
Right. We're not, we're not that podcast.
Well, just like because I didn't know anything about it or whatever,
Sure,
but
sure.
But I started watching it. I was like, wow. And I mean, they've got some really, great actors, doing it. And it is so dystopian, but there's a certain amount of like this fascination of like, what the fuck is going on?
Right.
That I just can't, like, I watched the whole first season. And I'll tell you, like, you'll find out, like, it gets weirder and weirder. Right. There are certain aspects to it where but it does it in this way where, like, on one hand, you kind of have this, like, everything is fine. This is just a small town.
Right.
Where people go to the office. But then the office just gets progressively weirder and weirder.
Right. Right.
And then it comes to the head at the end of the first season where it has some big twists and reveals. I don't know and I think probably because, it said like Ben Stiller presents.
Right. That's a fascinating aspect of it. Yeah.
What's his name?
A lot of episodes.
The main actor, Adam Scott?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Adam Scott. Yeah.
Right. Like, who's previously was like, you were in Funny Things, right?
Yes. He was in Parks and Rec. And Step Brothers and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it is just this really weird show where, like, what is going on? It is that kind of sci-fi dystopian, but then it does that thing that like fiction does where, look, it's not, it's like it's an original series Star Trek. They're talking about something in the real world, but they painted it with this like sci-fi, whatever brush.
Right. That's that's an interesting point that I actually I thought about bringing up when you're talking about Section 31. I did not expect there to be a connection here. It is very clear. Like, my first reaction was like, oh, this feels like a Twilight Zone episode, right? Which Rod Serling famously used his show to make commentary on American culture, right? And there was a podcast I was listening to. I think it was the Nextlander podcast, for those that know. Video game critics that are now old and going solo outside of the corporate sphere. And there were a lot of reflection happens on their podcast. And one of the things they were talking about that I found was really interesting, and keeps coming up in conversations I've been having, are like the loss of the monoculture, and part of that being a lot of these franchises that we grew up in loving that used to be kind of about the commentary shifted to being about themselves. They're kind of talking about Star Wars specifically. Like, Star Wars originally was like a pastiche of the old serials, but now it's about Star Wars. Right. And like, did we lose something in that? And there's an aspect that I wanted to kind of touch on with Section 31. It's like, is this Star Trek getting up its own butt a little bit? Because there's something innate about the premise of Star Trek that allows it to be a commentary on modern issues. That aside, we can go back to Section 31 if you want. Like, that's one thing that really stands out about a Severance, is that it is a blatant, like, it's not even subtle. But that lack of subtlety maybe is what we need right now. Right. Even in its unsubtlety, it's pretty powerful and fascinating to watch as they move through these characters' stories.
You will see it will get weirder and weirder. Mm-hmm. And there are things where they kind of stuff comes up where, like, it's things that, like, they're done to an extreme in the context of the show. But, like, I mean, there's commentaries about, like, weird, like, workplace culture, like you're part of the company, like the company horse shit, like, we're a family, we're whatever, like, no, you're a company.
Run if you ever hear that shit, for fuck's sake.
And I mean, to an extreme, right? They do some shit where you're like, what? And, like, there will be an episode,
the break room.
There will be an episode where you will probably stop and text me and say, what in the fuck is going on? And I will just say that, enjoy your waffle party. But the people who know what that's about are like, oh yeah, actually that's.
With that in mind, one of the things that really stands out to me 3 episodes in is what I find really fascinating artistically is like the scenes that are set in the workplace isn't presented in a cold, rational, and kind of codified way, especially like when they walk through the hallways and stuff. Like, when you're at work, it follows a dream logic in the sense that it makes no sense, but it almost makes sense, which makes it terrifying. And I really respect a lot of the artistic choices they're making for the show, because it's when you're outside of work, when you get to do what you want, where you get to indulge, because if you're severed, you don't have to worry. You don't have to spend your weekend worrying about work. That's where you can be like living in your not fantasy, but you can be living in your indulgences. But it's when you leave work, it's cold and it's lonely and it's sad and it's scary. But when you're at work, it's just like, like I said, it's dream logic. Like it's terrifying in a completely different way, because it almost makes sense, but it doesn't make sense enough to be off-putting and scary.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been thinking about with that in mind is like, how many drafts did this premiere get through before they changed the title to Severance from what was probably 16 tons, right?
Which was Amazon RTO,
right? Like,
sorry, that wasn't a thing when that show came out,
but this whole idea of like a company store, like it's clear they're living in like company housing, and like, damn. I wish I bet Upton Sinclair would have loved this show.
Yeah, it's just so weird. Again, it's weird because it feels like it just came out of like nowhere. You know,
right.
Like, where was this? Like, where did this come from? And again, like, why the funny man make the serious show, right?
right. It's strange. It's fascinating. So I might do a check-in when we finish season 1. But yeah, I'm sure at some point we'll come back to Severance. So at this point, though, we should sever this conversation. So if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You could also post your comments on social media somewhere.
Yep.
You know, that's all I'm going to say.
We have a Facebook page, but you can find us on our... you can more accurately find us on our respective social media, specifically the places that we hang out, which means you can find me on Instagram and Blue Sky. But Instagram is the URL I remember right now, which is Instagram. You can find me at Bethel. And you can find Andrew on Mastodon at profounddark@dice.camp.
Which reminds me, I need to actually officially purge my Facebook.
I need to purge my Twitter, yeah.
While you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a look at our YouTube page, which you can find by clicking on the link in the corner that says YouTube. There you'll find the show simulcast on YouTube. If you are listening to it there, or you're a fan of YouTube, please like and subscribe. As the kids like to say, ring that bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. Both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License.
If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to leave some sort of review. Whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms. I want to end on another piece of news, Andrew, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I forgot this happened, and when I sent you the news, you were like, this happened in the first place? And again, it goes back to comic books. Sorry to bring it back there. But I can't believe I missed this news. In September of 2024, it was announced that Marvel and DC Comics lost their shared trademark of the word superhero. You were like, they had a shared trademark on the word superhero? I'm like, yes, they did. Awarded to them a while ago. But now, if you have superhero merchandise or stories that you want to tell, you can feel free to use the word superhero without any takedown notices from the big two. So you're welcome. The law, in this case, prevailed.
Yeah, still weird. I just did not realize that.
So it's so weird. It's so weird. I don't know. I just wanted an excuse to play the Nerd Law theme. Here we go.
Nerd Law! Nerd Law! Nerd Law! Nerd Law! You can count that Andrew is on the case, getting legal anytime and in any place with this Nerd Law! Nerd Law! Nerd Law! Nerd Law! Help out the people at any price, but it's not giving out any
So, what do you have to say to that? Any nerd law things?
I like that I got out nerdlawed. Yeah, I got nothing to say. Again, just being absolutely flabbergasted they had that.
Like it seems like it would be unfathomable to award that to them.
It feels like one of those things that was granted in an era where with like in the 70s they got this trademark or whatever, and no one's reevaluated it since then.
Hey, it goes to show if you're a big corporation, you can win most of the time, but not today. Superheroes are for everybody. So until you realize the superhero that you are, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
I'm going to sit down. I'm sweating. Oh, shit. Okay,
Wait, you're sweating shit?
I'm sweating shit. It's a new treatment. It's a new therapy. I'm sore.
Tell me more. So it's this idea that like this show.
You got the consumption.
No, it's just a little. I'm also having talking too much problem.
Same. That's why I'm drinking tea right now, actually.
Yeah, I'm drinking water. It's like tea, but cold.
Communist.
And not with herbs. Anyway.
No herbs. So at this point, though, we should sever this conversation.
Oh, that's awkward, isn't it? I'm not going to remember we even had it.
I'm going to consult my innie.
So anyway.
So just randomly at times, we're just like, love sack baby. My puppy dog Rusty is as big as a whale. And so it's been fun.
The love sack is where people can get together.
That's where it's at. Tin Roof Rusty.